Imagine reaching under your bathroom sink to fix a leaky pipe, and your hand brushes against a hidden, prepaid burner phone duct taped to the porcelain. That is exactly what happened to Julian Hayes. He thought he was the luckiest man alive, celebrating 10 flawless years of marriage to the perfect woman. But as he read the single chilling text message glowing in the dark, he realized a terrifying truth. His wife wasn't his soulmate. She was a predator. He wasn't her husband. He was target 4. And she was planning to steal his entire life's work in exactly 5 days. If a house has a cracked foundation, the whole thing will eventually collapse. Julian was an architect. He knew how to build things. But now, he had 5 days to build a trap for the woman sleeping next to him. 42-year-old Julian Hayes was, by all accounts, the luckiest man in the world. He was incredibly successful, having just sold his boutique architecture firm for a massive multi-million-dollar buyout. But if you asked Julian what his greatest achievement was, he wouldn't mention the skyline or the money. He would immediately point to his wife, Valerie. Valerie was 38, effortlessly beautiful, and possessed a heart of pure gold. She spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal rescue. She cooked Julian's favorite meals when he worked late, and she was the anchor to his chaotic life. Next month marked their 10-year wedding anniversary. To celebrate, Julian had just transferred his $2.4 million firm buyout into their joint account to officially break ground on their custom dream home in the Hamptons. Life was completely, undeniably perfect. It was a quiet Saturday morning. Valerie had kissed him goodbye at dawn, heading off to a 4-day silent yoga retreat in Sedona to recharge before the stress of the new house build began. Julian was looking forward to a peaceful weekend of sketching and watching college football. He was in the kitchen pouring his second cup of coffee when he heard it. Drip, drip, drip. Julian frowned, setting his mug down. He followed the sound up the curved oak staircase, down the hallway and into the master suite. The sound was coming from Valerie's vanity in the master bathroom. He opened the cabinet doors beneath her sink. A small pool of water was forming around the U-shaped PVC pipe, soaking into the wood. A standard leak. Nothing a seasoned architect and a wrench couldn't fix in 10 minutes. Julian grabbed his toolbox from the garage, laid a towel down on the bathroom floor and slid his shoulders into the cramped, dark space beneath the cabinet. He reached his hand up high behind the porcelain basin, feeling blindly for the shut-off valve to stop the water flow. Instead of cold, hard brass, Julian's knuckles brushed against something completely out of place. It was thick, rough, and slightly sticky. Julian pulled his flashlight from his belt and shined it up into the dark cavity behind the sink. Taped directly to the underside of the porcelain basin, hidden in a blind spot that no one would ever look at unless they were doing deep plumbing repairs, was a thick square of silver duct tape. And secured beneath the tape was a rectangular object wrapped in a plastic Ziploc bag. Julian's brow furrowed. He reached up, dug his fingernails under the edge of the tape, and ripped it free. He slid out from under the sink and sat up on the tile floor. He opened the plastic bag and dumped the object into his palm. It was a cheap, black, prepaid burner phone, the kind you buy with cash at a gas station. A cold, uneasy feeling began to snake its way up Julian's spine. Why would Valerie have a burner phone taped under the sink? He pressed the power button on the side. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue light across his face. The battery icon showed it was fully charged. She must have swapped it out recently. There was no passcode. Julian swiped the screen to unlock it. His heart began to pound a heavy, erratic rhythm against his ribs. There were no apps, no photos, just the basic messaging application. He opened the contacts. There was only one number saved, completely untraceable, listed under a single, chilling moniker. The architect. Julian's breath hitched. Was this a sick joke? He was the architect. Who was this? He backed out of the contacts and opened the messages. There was only one unread text, received just 3 hours ago, right around the time Valerie's flight would have landed in Arizona. Julian's eyes scanned the glowing text, and in an instant, his entire world stopped spinning. The joint accounts are fully funded. Escrow clears on Thursday. Drain everything and meet me at the marina. Target 4 is done. Julian stopped breathing. The bathroom suddenly felt impossibly small. The air was entirely sucked out of the room. The joint accounts are fully funded. He had just deposited his $2.4 million buyout into their shared account 2 days ago. Escrow clears on Thursday. The land purchase for their dream home was scheduled to finalize on Thursday. Target 4 is done. Julian stared at the words until they blurred. Target 4. He whispered into the empty house, his voice trembling with a terror he couldn't comprehend. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't a partner. He was a mark. He was a target. I have goosebumps right now. Imagine thinking you are in a perfect loving marriage for 10 years, only to find out you are just a target with a literal expiration date. Thursday. She is planning to steal millions of dollars and vanish into thin air in 5 days. If you are already screaming at the screen for Julian to lock his bank accounts, drop a closed padlock emoji in the comments. But hold on. Julian is about to check the safe, and what he finds is going to shatter any hope that this is just a misunderstanding. Let's get back to the story. Julian scrambled to his feet. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the cheap plastic phone. No, he muttered frantically, his mind desperately trying to rationalize the impossible. It's a mistake. It's a prank. Someone broke in. It's not her. He ran out of the bathroom and tore into his massive walk-in closet. He pushed past his suits, dropping to his knees in the back corner. He peeled back the false baseboard, revealing a heavy steel biometric wall safe. He pressed his thumb against the scanner. The light flashed green. The heavy door clicked open. Julian reached blindly into the dark metal box. His fingers found his own passport, his birth certificate, and the emergency cash. But as he patted down the velvet lining of the bottom shelf, his stomach violently dropped. Valerie's passport was gone. And sitting right next to where her passport should have been was a small, empty, navy blue velvet box. Julian pulled the box out into the light. He opened it. It was completely empty. It was the box that held Valerie's grandmother's heirloom diamond ring, the only possession in the world she claimed she truly cared about. The ring she swore never to travel with because she was terrified of losing it. She hadn't gone to a yoga retreat. She was already packing up her life. Julian sat back on his heels in the silent, immaculate closet. The perfect life he had built shattered into a million jagged pieces around him. The woman who kissed him this morning, the woman who volunteered with puppies and baked him pies, didn't exist. She was a ghost. A predator who had spent 10 years patiently earning his absolute trust, waiting for the exact moment his life's work was converted into liquid cash. And on Thursday, she was going to drain his accounts, step onto a boat at a marina, and vanish from the face of the earth, leaving him bankrupt and broken. Julian looked down at the burner phone still clutched in his trembling hand. The screen went dark, reflecting his pale, horrified face. Grief washed over him in a suffocating, crushing wave. But as Julian stared at his own reflection, the grief began to recede, replaced by the cold, calculating mind of an architect. If Valerie thought he was just another target, Nicolas, she had vastly underestimated the man she married. She wanted to demolish his life on Thursday? Fine. Julian was going to build her a cage, and he was going to make sure she walked right into it. Here we go. The stakes are about to get incredibly high. We are moving from the initial shock straight into the cold, terrifying reality of who Valerie actually is. Julian Hayes didn't call the police. As an architect, he was a man of logic and structure. He knew the law. Valerie's name was legally on the joint accounts. If she transferred the $2.4 million buyout out of the country on Thursday, it wouldn't technically be theft in the eyes of the bank. It would be a marital dispute. By the time the courts froze the assets, she and the money would be ghosts in a non-extradition country. If he wanted to survive this, he couldn't just react. He had to outbuild her. Julian left the empty velvet ring box on the floor of the closet. He pocketed the burner phone, grabbed his keys, and drove straight to the industrial district of downtown Chicago. He pulled up to an unmarked brick building and buzzed the back door. It was opened by Declan, an ex-forensic accountant turned private cyber investigator whom Julian had hired years ago to audit his firm's security. Declan was paranoid, brilliant, and most importantly, completely discreet. "Julian," Declan said, leading him into a dark office glowing with the light of 6 computer monitors. "It's Saturday. You look like you haven't breathed in 3 hours. What's going on? Julian didn't say a word. He just set the cheap black burner phone on Declan's desk. I need to know everything about the person on the other end of that phone, Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And I need you to run a deep web facial recognition scan on my wife. Declan's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't ask questions. He plugged the burner phone into a specialized decryption terminal. The message was sent from a heavily encrypted VoIP number. But they made a mistake. They connected to a public cell tower for 3 seconds before the VPN kicked in. I can ping the MAC address of the device they used. Declan's fingers flew across the keyboard. Lines of green code cascaded down the center monitor. Okay, Declan muttered. The device pinging that number is registered to a residential address in South Beach, Miami. The name on the utility bill is Thomas Vance. All the blood drained from Julian's face. He gripped the edge of Declan's desk to keep his knees from buckling. Thomas, Julian whispered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Thomas was Valerie's older brother. He flew in every Thanksgiving. He slept in Julian's guest room. They drank scotch together on the back porch. Thomas had stood up at their wedding and given a tear-jerking toast about how happy he was that his little sister had finally found a good man to protect her. Thomas wasn't her brother. He was her handler. He was her partner in a massive, million-dollar grift. He was the architect orchestrating the demolition of Julian's life. Julian. Declan's voice was suddenly very quiet. He was staring at the right-hand monitor. He had just run Valerie's wedding photo through a global facial recognition database. You need to look at this. Julian walked around the desk. On the screen were 3 different newspaper clippings and bankruptcy filings, spanning 3 different decades. The woman in the photos had different hair colors, different styles, and different names. But the eyes, the warm hazel eyes Julian had kissed just that morning, were exactly the same. Her real name isn't Valerie, Declan said, his voice heavy with disbelief. In 1996, she was Sarah. She married a commercial developer in Texas. 10 years later, on the day he liquidated his assets to buy a hotel, she vanished. He lost $1.5 million. Declan clicked to the next file. In 2006, she was Alina. Married a top-tier surgeon in Miami. Played the perfect doting housewife. A decade later, he sold his private practice. She wired $2 million to an offshore account while he was in the operating room. He came home to an empty house. Declan brought up the final photo. It was a man looking utterly destroyed, sitting outside a courthouse. And in 2016, she was Rachel. She married Arthur Pendleton, a software engineer in Seattle. He poured his life savings into a tech startup. The week it finally went public, she drained the accounts and disappeared. Arthur was left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Julian stared at the screen. The pattern was horrifyingly perfect. 10 years. It was a 10-year cycle. Valerie wasn't a wife. She was a parasite. She targeted humble, hard-working men with high-earning potential. Spent a decade perfectly mirroring their every desire, building absolute, unshakable trust and waiting for the exact moment their life's work turned into liquid cash. She was a sociopath running a corporate business model. And Julian was just target 4. Buzz. Julian flinched. His personal iPhone was vibrating in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a text message from Valerie. It was a beautiful selfie of her smiling brightly in front of Red Rock Mountains wearing her yoga gear. Valerie, the silent retreat is ending early. Missing you so much, my love. I'm catching the red eye tonight. Can't wait to be home tomorrow so we can start building our dream house. Love you, forever. She was coming home. The trap was closing. She wanted to be in the house, physically monitoring him to make sure he didn't check the bank accounts before Thursday morning. Declan looked at Julian, seeing the raw, unadulterated horror in his friend's eyes. Julian, you have to pack a bag. You have to leave. I know a lawyer who can freeze the accounts on Monday morning, but it's going to be messy. If she knows you know. These people are dangerous. Julian looked at the picture of his wife's smiling face. Then he looked at the photograph of Arthur Pendleton, the ruined software engineer from Seattle, sitting on the courthouse steps. The profound, agonizing heartbreak in Julian's chest suddenly crystallized. It hardened into a cold, diamond-sharp rage. No, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. He locked his phone and put it back in his pocket. Julian, what are you doing? Declan asked, standing up. I'm going home, Julian said, his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying focus. I'm going to cook my wife her favorite meal. I'm going to pick her up from the airport. And I am going to smile. Julian leaned over the desk, pointing a shaking finger at the photo of Target 3. Declan, find Arthur Pendleton. I don't care what it costs. Get him on a plane to Chicago by Wednesday night. And then, I need you to build me a phantom server. I am absolutely speechless. She is a professional parasite. A 10-year cycle, just to steal their life savings. It makes me physically sick to think about all those fake smiles, fake anniversaries, and fake I love yous. Could you imagine finding out your entire decade-long marriage was just a shift at work for a con artist? Let me know in the comments if you were Julian. Could you look her in the eyes tomorrow and pretend everything is fine? Because that is exactly what he has to do. Hit that like button if you are ready to see Julian outsmart her. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating gray overcast. Julian stood at the arrivals terminal of O'Hare International Airport, holding a bouquet of vibrant yellow tulips, Valerie's favorite. His palms were sweating, slipping against the crinkling plastic of the flower wrapper. He had spent the entire night pacing his empty house, practicing his smile in the mirror until his facial muscles cramped. He couldn't afford a single micro-expression of disgust. If she sensed even a fraction of his newly discovered hatred, she would trigger the wire transfer early and vanish before he could set his trap. The sliding glass doors of the terminal opened. And there she was. Valerie looked effortlessly stunning. She was wearing comfortable, expensive yoga leggings, a perfectly oversized cashmere sweater, and a warm, glowing smile that reached all the way up to her hazel eyes. To the dozens of people walking past her, she looked like an angel. To Julian, she looked like a beautifully wrapped bomb. Julian. She gasped, her face lighting up with genuine-looking joy. She dropped her duffel bag, ran across the linoleum floor, and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. Julian's breath hitched. Her familiar perfume, vanilla and sandalwood, filled his lungs. For 10 years that scent meant home. Now it smelled like absolute poison. It took every ounce of his willpower, every fiber of his being, not to push her away. Instead, Julian forced his arms up. He wrapped them tightly around her waist, buried his face in her hair and squeezed. I missed you so much, Valerie whispered against his neck. You have no idea, Julian replied, his voice thick with an emotion she completely misinterpreted. Welcome home, honey. The car ride back to their suburban neighborhood was an agonizing masterclass in psychological torture. Julian drove, keeping his hands locked tightly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel while Valerie happily chatted away in the passenger seat. She spun an intricate, flawless lie about the silent retreat in Sedona. She talked about the meditation, the red rocks, and how much clarity she had found. She was so convincing, so perfectly natural, that Julian found himself briefly doubting reality. Maybe Declan was wrong. Maybe it was a mistake. But then, Valerie casually reached over, resting her warm hand on his thigh. I was thinking about the new house, babe, she said softly, her thumb drawing slow circles on his jeans. The realtor called me while I was on my layover. She said the sellers are ready to finalize the land purchase. Is the buyout money fully cleared in the joint account? The question was dropped so casually, so innocently, that a normal husband would never have noticed the lethal intent behind it. Julian's blood ran completely cold. Target 4 is done. Escrow clears Thursday. He kept his eyes on the road. He forced a relaxed, loving smile onto his face. Yes, sweetheart, Julian lied smoothly. All 2.4 million. Sitting right there in the joint account, waiting for Thursday morning. We are totally good to go, Valerie smiled, leaning back in her seat and looking out the window. Perfect. I can't wait to start this new chapter with you. The next 3 days were a waking nightmare. Julian went to work at his architectural consulting firm during the day, using every spare second to coordinate with Declan and his bankers in absolute secrecy. But the evenings were the hardest. He had to go home and play the devoted husband. On Tuesday night, Valerie cooked his absolute favorite meal, a complex, slow-roasted lamb shank with rosemary potatoes. It was a dish that took 4 hours to prepare. She stood in the kitchen in a beautiful summer dress, pouring him an expensive glass of Cabernet, laughing at his jokes and asking about his day. Julian sat at the kitchen island, watching her. He began to notice the invisible cracks in her mask. When she turned around to check the oven, the warm, loving smile instantly vanished from her face, replaced by a cold, dead, shark-like stare. When she thought he was watching television, he caught her rapidly texting on a second, hidden phone she kept slipped inside her apron pocket. She was coordinating with Thomas. She was a predator, patiently fattening up the calf. And she was completely unaware that the calf was a wolf in sheep's clothing. The climax of her psychological manipulation arrived on Wednesday evening, just 12 hours before her planned escape. They were sitting on the couch together, a fire crackling in the hearth. Valerie sighed, reaching into her leather tote bag. She pulled out a thick manila envelope and a sleek silver pen. "Oh, Julian, I almost forgot," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She pulled out a stack of dense, heavily worded legal documents. "The title company needs this signed by both of us tonight so they can authorize the final escrow withdrawal tomorrow morning. It's just standard dual authorization paperwork." She placed the papers on the coffee table and handed him the pen. Julian looked down at the documents. He was an architect. He dealt with complex contracts every single day. He didn't need to read the fine print to know what it was, but he skimmed it anyway. It wasn't a title document for a new house. It was an unrestricted wire authorization form. By signing it, Julian was legally granting Valerie unilateral power to wire millions of dollars out of their joint account, across international borders, without triggering a fraud alert or requiring a verbal confirmation from him. It was the final nail in his coffin. She was handing him the hammer and asking him to swing it. Julian looked up at Valerie. Her hazel eyes were wide, innocent, and deeply loving. "Just sign at the bottom, babe," she urged softly. "And then tomorrow, our dream finally starts." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to rip the paper in half, to throw the silver pen in her face, and to scream that he knew exactly who she was. He wanted to shatter her perfect, smug facade. But Julian Hayes was a builder. He knew that if you pour the concrete before the rebar is set, the trap fails. Julian took a slow, deep breath. He took the silver pen from her hand. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name on the dotted line, officially handing her the legal right to steal his entire life savings. "There you go, sweetheart," Julian smiled, handing the documents back to her. Valerie's eyes briefly flashed with a terrifying, victorious gleam. She quickly masked it, leaning over to kiss him deeply on the mouth. "Thank you, my love. You are going to be so happy tomorrow, I promise." Julian watched her walk the documents over to her purse, her hips swaying, entirely convinced she had just won. He took a sip of his wine, hiding his own cold, ruthless smile behind the rim of the glass. "Yes, Valerie," he thought. "Tomorrow is going to be a day we both remember for the rest of our lives." "Hey guys, I am sweating. Are you sweating?" He signed the papers. He literally just handed the woman who was trying to destroy him the legal keys to his bank account. I was screaming at my monitor, "Julian, do not sign that." But Julian is an architect. He doesn't make mistakes. He gave her exactly what she wanted because he has something so much worse planned for her. If you are on the edge of your seat right now, hit that subscribe button, because the next phase is going to blow your mind. While Valerie spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday measuring curtains and picking out paint swatches for a house she never intended to build, Julian was quietly constructing a masterpiece of a trap. To Valerie, Julian was just going to the office, buried in blueprints and client meetings. She thought he was a predictable, trusting fool. She had no idea that every morning Julian bypassed his architectural firm entirely and drove straight to an underground parking garage to meet with his private wealth manager and Detective Reynolds, a seasoned veteran of the Chicago PD's Financial Crimes Unit. The first step was securing the foundation. The money. Julian sat in the sterile glass-walled office of his wealth manager, Mr. Sterling. Sterling had known Julian for 15 years. He looked deeply concerned as Julian slid the paperwork across the mahogany desk. "Julian, you realize what this does?" Sterling asked, adjusting his glasses. "Moving the entire $2.4 million buyout into an irrevocable blind trust with only your name on it. It completely drains the joint account." The escrow for the Hamptons property is supposed to pull from that account on Thursday. The land deal will collapse. I know, Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. Do it anyway. Does Valerie know? Sterling pressed gently. This is a massive marital asset shift. Valerie doesn't exist, Bob, Julian said coldly, standing up from the chair. Just execute the transfer. Leave exactly $14.50 in the joint account. Julian walked out of the bank feeling 10 pounds lighter. The real money was completely untouchable. But he knew that if Valerie simply logged in and saw a $14 balance, she would get an automated alert on her phone and instantly vanish into the wind before the police could catch her and her handler. He had to make her believe the money was still there, right up until the exact second she tried to steal it. That was where Declan's absolute genius, and a terrifyingly close call, came into play. On Tuesday afternoon, Julian executed the most stressful distraction of his life. He convinced Valerie to drive out to a high-end boutique 3 towns over to look at imported Italian patio furniture. He knew the drive would take 45 minutes each way, giving Declan plenty of time to slip into the house and hack Valerie's sleek silver laptop. But 20 minutes into the drive, Valerie suddenly gasped, patting her expensive leather purse. Oh no. Julian. Turn the car around, she said, her voice laced with sudden panic. I left my my work phone on the kitchen counter. I have to text my client back. Julian's heart slammed into his throat. If they turned around now, they would walk right into the kitchen while Declan was actively dismantling her laptop's security firewall. Babe, we're already halfway there. Julian laughed, forcing a light, breezy tone while his knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. Just call them from your main phone. No. I need that phone, Julian. Valerie insisted, her tone suddenly dropping its sweet facade, revealing a sharp, demanding edge. Turn the car around. Now. Julian swallowed hard. He pulled into a gas station, his mind racing. Okay. Let me just run in and grab a water first. You want anything? He didn't wait for her answer. Julian practically sprinted into the gas station, hiding behind an aisle of potato chips as he frantically dialed Declan's number. Get out, Julian hissed into the phone the second it connected. She forgot the burner phone. We are heading back right now. I need 3 more minutes, Julian. Declan shouted over the sound of rapidly clacking keys. The malware is at 80%. You have 5 minutes before we pull into the driveway, Julian warned. Do not get caught. Julian dragged out the gas station stop for as long as humanly possible, buying 3 different types of bottled water and agonizingly slow chatting with the cashier. When they finally pulled back into their driveway, Julian held his breath. Valerie marched into the house, heading straight for the kitchen. Julian followed closely behind. The kitchen was empty. The silver laptop was sitting perfectly closed on the island, and her black burner phone was sitting exactly where she left it. Declan was gone. Later that night, Declan explained the trap. When she types in the web address for your bank on Thursday, my software intercepts the connection. It redirects her to a phantom server I built in my basement. It looks identical to the real bank portal. When she logs in, it will show a perfectly healthy joint account with exactly $2.4 million sitting inside. But it's just digital paint. A sandbox. Step 1 was complete. The bait was set. Step 2 was securing the perimeter. Detective Reynolds had successfully tapped the burner phone's network. On Wednesday afternoon, Reynolds showed Julian the actual text logs between Valerie and Thomas. Julian sat in the back of Reynolds' unmarked cruiser, reading the transcript. His stomach violently churned. Thomas, is he suspecting anything? Valerie, absolutely nothing. He's completely clueless. Sits there smiling like an idiot while I pick out paint colors for a house that's never getting built. He signed the dual authorization forms last night. Thomas, good girl. I have the yacht chartered at Monroe Harbor. The second you wire the funds on Thursday, get in the Uber. We're wheels up to the Caymans by noon. We have units staged at the marina, Detective Reynolds told Julian, snapping the file shut. The second she hits transfer on her laptop tomorrow, she commits felony wire fraud across state and international lines. We breach the house, take her down, and my team at the harbor swarms the yacht and bags Thomas. We get them both. No, Julian said quietly, staring out at the Chicago skyline. You take Thomas. But I want to be the one who walks into that home office tomorrow morning. She needs to see my face when it all comes crashing down. The final piece of the trap, the psychological wrecking ball, arrived on Wednesday night at 2:00 a.m. Valerie was fast asleep in their master bedroom, dreaming of her impending wealth. Julian carefully slipped out from under the covers, dressed in the dark, and drove through the deserted, rain-slicked streets to Declan's industrial office. Sitting in a worn leather chair in the corner of the room was a man who looked like a walking ghost. It was Arthur Pendleton. Target 3. Arthur was only 50 years old, but he looked closer to 70. His hair was thinning and stark white. He was the living, breathing casualty of the woman sleeping in Julian's bed. Arthur, Julian said softly, extending his hand. Arthur stood up slowly. I told the police about her 10 years ago. His voice was raspy, hollowed out by years of depression. I told them she planned it, but they just looked at me like I was a bitter, divorced husband. I lost my company. I lost my home. I haven't slept a full night in a decade. Arthur looked up, his eyes suddenly welling with thick, angry tears. Watch her hands, Julian, Arthur whispered, a haunting intensity suddenly gripping him. When she thinks she's won. Right before she pulls the trigger. She rubs her left thumb over her wedding ring. It's a nervous tick. She did it to me the night before she ruined me. Julian felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Valerie had done exactly that when he signed the wire authorization forms on the couch. It wasn't a quirk. It was her tell. I have her, Arthur, Julian promised, his voice echoing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 10:00 a.m., she is going to try to destroy me. But when she turns around, I want you to be the first thing she sees. A dark, incredibly satisfying spark finally ignited in Arthur Pendleton's tired eyes. The blueprint was finished. The foundation was poured. The cage was locked. Thursday morning had finally arrived. Okay, I was literally holding my breath when they turned the car around. Can you imagine the panic of trying to stall your scammer wife at a gas station while your hacker friend is breaking into her laptop in your kitchen? My anxiety was through the roof. And the detail about her rubbing the wedding ring? Chills. Literal chills. Drop a fire in the comments if you are absolutely living for Julian's revenge plan right now. But the real question is, how is she going to react when the trap finally snaps shut? Let's get to the ending. Thursday morning broke with a bright, crisp, deceptively beautiful sunrise. At 8:00 a.m., Julian stood by the front door, wearing his tailored charcoal suit, holding his leather briefcase. Valerie stood in front of him tying his silk tie, her warm hazel eyes looking up at him with absolute, flawless adoration. I'll call the realtor as soon as the wire clears at 10 o'clock, she smiled, smoothing her hands down his chest. I'll have champagne waiting for you when you get home, my love. It was the performance of a lifetime, but Julian was done being the audience. He looked at the woman who had spent a decade slowly siphoning his life away. He didn't flinch. He didn't break character. He simply smiled back, kissed her softly on the forehead, and delivered his final, loaded line. Make sure you pack everything you need, Valerie. I'll see you when it's done. Julian walked out the front door, climbed into his car and drove down the street. But he didn't go to the office. He parked exactly 2 blocks away, directly behind an unmarked black police SUV. Detective Reynolds was in the driver's seat. Arthur Pendleton sat silently in the back. In Julian's lap sat an iPad, live streaming the feed from Declan's Phantom server. At 9:45 a.m., the screen on Julian's iPad flickered. User V_Hayes logged in. Inside the house, Valerie was sitting at Julian's heavy oak desk in the home office. She was no longer wearing her comfortable yoga clothes. She was dressed in a sharp, anonymous black trench coat, her hair pulled back tightly. Sitting next to the desk was a sleek leather duffel bag packed with her stolen heirlooms, the emergency cash, and her passport. She opened the silver laptop. She typed in the web address for Julian's bank. Declan's malware executed perfectly in the background. She didn't notice the microscopic lag. She didn't notice that the URL was a masked proxy. The screen loaded. Current balance, $2,414.50. In the police SUV 2 blocks away, Julian watched her cursor move across his iPad screen. She's initiating the wire, Julian said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. Detective Reynolds picked up his radio. Harbor unit. Suspect is in motion. Get ready to breach the yacht. Inside the office, Valerie clicked the transfer funds tab. She typed in the offshore routing number provided by Thomas. She entered the full amount. $2,400,000 linear dollars. A confirmation window popped up, requesting the dual authorization code she had secured from Julian the night before. Valerie paused. She took a deep breath. And then, her left thumb reached over and slowly, rhythmically rubbed the diamond wedding ring on her finger. The exact same nervous, victorious tick she had performed 10 years ago in Seattle. She typed the code. She clicked confirm transfer. She leaned back in the leather chair, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief and triumph. It was over. 10 years of playing the devoted housewife, 10 years of fake smiles and forced affection, finally liquidated into pure, untraceable wealth. But the screen didn't flash a green confirmation checkmark. Instead, the web page suddenly went completely black. Valerie frowned, leaning forward. She tapped the trackpad. Nothing happened. Then, stark white text began to type itself across the center of the black screen, letter by terrifying letter. Transfer denied. Actual account balance $14.50. The foundation was weak. Goodbye, Sarah. Goodbye, Elena. Goodbye, Rachel. All the blood violently drained from Valerie's face. Her breath hitched in her throat, morphing into a sharp, panicked gasp. Her eyes went wide with sheer, unadulterated terror as she stared at the names of her past lives glowing on the screen. No, she whispered, her hands frantically flying across the keyboard, slamming the escape key. No, 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 no. The money is gone, Valerie. It was moved to a blind trust on Monday. Valerie violently spun her chair around. Julian was standing in the doorway of the home office. He wasn't smiling. He looked like a statue carved out of ice. Standing immediately to his left was Detective Reynolds, his gold badge gleaming against his dark jacket. Julian, Valerie choked out, her perfectly crafted mask entirely shattering. She practically fell out of the chair, her knees hitting the floor. The tears she began to cry were finally truly genuine, born from absolute panic. Julian, please. I can explain. My brother, he forced me. Save it, Julian interrupted, his voice echoing like a gavel striking wood. Your handler is already in handcuffs. Right on cue, Detective Reynolds' radio crackled. Unit 4 to Reynolds. The marina is secure. Suspect Thomas Vance is in custody. The yacht is locked down. Valerie let out a gut-wrenching sob, covering her face with her hands. The entire intricate, 10-year house of cards collapsed onto her shoulders in a matter of seconds. Stand up, ma'am, Detective Reynolds commanded, stepping into the room and pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for felony wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. As Reynolds pulled her roughly to her feet and clicked the cold steel around her wrists, Julian stepped aside. From the shadows of the hallway, a frail, white-haired man slowly walked into the light of the home office. Valerie looked up through her tears. When her hazel eyes locked onto his face, she physically recoiled as if she had just seen a ghost. Hello, Rachel, Arthur Pendleton whispered. For the first time in 10 years, Arthur stood tall. The heavy, invisible weight that had crushed his chest for a decade finally lifted. He looked at the woman who had ruined him, saw her in handcuffs, stripped of her power and her fake wealth, and he felt absolute peace. Valerie couldn't even speak. She just stared at Arthur in complete, paralyzed horror as Detective Reynolds marched her out of the house, her stolen duffel bag left abandoned by the desk. Julian and Arthur stood in the quiet office, listening to the wail of police sirens fading into the distance. Julian walked over to the desk, picked up the silver laptop, and snapped it shut. He looked around the room at the paint swatches for a house they would never build, and the framed wedding photo of a stranger. He had lost 10 years of his life to a lie. But he hadn't lost his foundation. Julian turned to Arthur. Can I buy you a cup of coffee, Arthur? Arthur smiled, a genuine warm smile. I'd like that very much, Julian. I think I'm finally going to sleep tonight. Oh my word, guys. I am shaking. The absolute poetry of Julian standing in that doorway telling her the foundation was weak. And then bringing Arthur out of the shadows to say hello, Rachel. That belongs in a Hollywood movie. Valerie thought she was the ultimate mastermind, but she picked the wrong architect to mess with. She spent 10 years building a fake life, just to spend the next 20 years in a very real prison cell. And the fact that Thomas got bagged on the yacht at the exact same time? Pure, unfiltered karma. I have to know what you guys think down in the comments. If you were Julian, could you have stayed that calm when she was rubbing her wedding ring and typing in the transfer code? Or would you have lost your mind? Let me know. If you loved this story of ultimate payback, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are telling the best and most satisfying stories on the internet, and I want you in our community. You do not want to miss it. Stay safe, trust your gut, and I'll see you in the next video.